welcome to our online learning channel. Today we are looking at our lesson 8 and we are looking specifically at poetry. Very interesting topic. And as we go through our poetry, which is our term 2 work still for weeks 1 and 2, we are going to focus on the following objectives. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define poetry, discuss internal and external features of poetry, analyze a poem, and answer poetry questions. Those are our objectives for this lesson on poetry. Right, we are going to look firstly at what poetry is. What is poetry? I know most of us have gone through poems, and some of us maybe are poets. We write our own poems. Right, according to William Wordsworth, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings or emotions, and that is put down in verse. It's put down in verse. In other words, it's not prose. It's different from that, and maybe we can relate verse to stanzas, closely related. We will see that when we look at our poem, which is as an example and entitled My Selfie Poem. Right? Also noteworthy is that poetry uses poetic devices such as figures of speech. Remember figures of speech we discussed in our previous lesson, rhyme, rhythm, etc. Poetic devices are seen in poetry. Right, let's look at key features of a poem. Key features of a poem. Like I said to you, you will see an example of a poem which I have right there on the screen, a very interesting poem, My Selfie Poem. I'm sure most of us like taking selfies. Right, look at that poem. I just want to read through it quickly so that you see the flow of emotions, how one feels about their self. My self poem, it goes like this. I am proud of all I have done, even though there's been a ton. I can do anything if I put my mind to it. And if I can't, I will never quit. I am proud of trying my best in sports, and all of my family supports. My favorite sport is baseball. When I play, I will never fail. I can do math, I can do science, I can do reading, I can do writing. To help me succeed, I am supported, so I am never lonely. I think you can already tell the flow of emotions there, how one feels about themselves. That is an example of a poem. And you can also see the structure of the poem. It is written in verse. Right, let's now zoom into the key features of a poem. Number one, a poem has an internal structure. What do we mean by that? We mean figures of speech or imagery, rhyme, rhythm. Those will be the internal structure of the poem. Then poetry also has external structure. The external structure, which is the outward structure now, the lines or words and stanzas. That's the external structure of a poem. Right, in addition, number 3, a poem also has figurative meaning. In other words, it does not only have a literal meaning. Remember literal meaning that we discussed previously in our language work? It has a deeper meaning, figurative meaning. A poem also has a mood, or it creates an atmosphere. And finally, number 5, another key feature of a poem is that it has a theme or a message. There is a theme or a message. Look maybe at the poem which we just read, my self poem. In this poem, we can say that the message is about how this person has gone through achieving everything they want to achieve. That would be their theme, that is their message. Right, let's look at the internal structure of poetry, figures of speech. What are figures of speech? Right, figurative language uses words or expressions with meaning different from the surface or the literal interpretation. Different from the surface or the general literal interpretation. That would be figurative language. And in order to clarify a point or paint a picture, the poet uses figurative language in comparisons. For example, we are looking at a figure of speech, a simile. He laughed like a hyena. See there the comparison between this laugh and that of a hyena. I wonder what that kind of a laugh would be like. Number 2, the poet also can use exaggeration, which is also a figure of speech. Exaggeration, which we term hyperbole. We all know hyperbole. Or they can also use alliteration, which we term internal rhyme. And all this will be to clarify a certain point. So figurative language or figures of speech are used by the poet to clarify their points. Another example I have there of exaggeration or a hyperbole. There was a sea of people at the stadium. Of course, we know that there wouldn't be that many, but that is just to exaggerate or to highlight the number of people that were at the stadium. Right, we are now looking closely into the figures of speech. Types of figures of speech. A, we have a simile. A simile which we saw previously. It is said there, it is a comparison that uses the word as and like. When you see a comparison which has a word as or like, it is a simile. I want you to look at the examples there that we have. She is as beautiful as a rose. She is as beautiful as a rose. So the comparison is between her beauty and that of a rose. He is as tall as a giraffe. His tallness is comparable to that of a giraffe. So that will be a simile. Or we can say she is beautiful like a rose. That will still be a simile. B, a metaphor. What is a metaphor? It is a comparison without the use of words as or like. No as or like, but there is a comparison. Let's look at our examples. One would say now he is a giraffe. Directly so without using as. So we can imagine how a giraffe looks like. And now we compare to how this person might be looking like. There must be some similarity between him and this giraffe. Some characteristic maybe. or some feature maybe. She is a rose. So instead of saying she is as beautiful as a rose, now we say she is a rose. That is a comparison without the use of words like. C, we have personification. Personification. That is when an inanimate object is given human qualities. An inanimate object given human qualities. For example, the sun smiled at her. The sun smiled at her. So think of the sun smiling at her. Most probably it was shining. And this sun has been given human qualities of smiling. Raindrops sang melodiously on the roof. The raindrops sang melodiously on the roof. Obviously, the rain was falling on the roof and making a melodious sound. Of course, we know the rain cannot sing, but it has been given human qualities. That is personification. D, hyperbole. Most of us are very good at exaggerating things, blow them out of proportion. But usually you will find that in poetry for certain emphasis to highlight something. This is a form of exaggeration, often in a human way. Examples, there were as many as the sand of the ocean. So that is an exaggeration or a hyperbole. He finished the food in a second. We can just imagine how quickly he ate. Maybe he was very hungry. But to say he finished it in a second is just an exaggeration, which is a hyperbole. Then let's look at E, euphemism. A mild or indirect expression used to replace a more direct or harsh term. Mild indirect expression which replaces a more direct and a harsh term. For example, we have the silent land. A silent land which could be standing for afterlife. When one has died, silent land, there is no talking. Maybe you think of a graveyard, silent land. Because maybe when we think of death, we are so afraid. It's maybe very much uncomfortable to discuss that. Then the poet can refer to death as afterlife as a silent land. And usually, even in our own vernacular languages, we say one has passed on. We don't say so and so has died. That is euphemism. So passed on for dead, because it's a harsh subject which we do not want to usually discuss. F, onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, that is to name something using the sound associated with it. Naming something using the sound associated with it. For example, the buzz of bees. Buzz of bees. I think you can imagine the sound the bees make is a buzz. The swishing sound of their tails. Maybe think of cows or horses. As they move their tails, they make a sound, a swishing sound. So that imitates the sound, and it is the onomatopoeia. Those are some of the types of figures of speech which we just wanted to discuss there. Then let's look at the external structure of a poem. We said it is the form of the poem in terms of stanzas and lines. I have there for you a picture of a sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet. Right? The Shakespearean sonnet or any other sonnet will always have 14 lines. That is the structure, the external structure. 14 lines, and it has a regular rhyme scheme. right? Just look at that poem, Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That is the title of the sonnet, one of Shakespeare's interesting sonnets, right? Note there are 14 lines, so that is the external structure. And you notice also the regular rhyme scheme we're talking about, the A, B, and going on and on. It does not change the rhyme scheme till we come to the rhyming couplet, your GG. Okay. So that is the external structure of a poem. When you look at it, you can see, okay, I can see so many stanzas, I can see so many lines, or I can also tell the rhyme scheme, external structure of the poem. Then we look also at the mood. What is mood? It is the feeling evoked in the reader by the poem through diction. Diction, that would be the choice of words, or imagery, which is figurative language. These can evoke feelings in a reader. So whatever feelings are evoked in a reader, then they bring about the mood. Examples of words which denote mood. Words which denote mood. Positive mood words. I have there for you: amused, cheerful, grateful, thankful, loving, relieved, pleased, sympathetic, excited, etc. Those are examples of positive mood words. If one is feeling cheerful, grateful, thankful, you name it, that would be positive, right? Then we come to negative mood words: annoyed, depressed, grumpy, hostile, cynical, cold, jealous, anxious, hopeless, or even worried. Those are just examples of words you can use to describe mood. Right, we move on to the next step, which is poetry analysis. What is poetry analysis? It is looking at the poem closely in order to understand it. Looking closely at a poem in order to understand it. How do you analyze a poem? You look at the poem line by line in order to study its structure and even the language used closely. So you cannot just look at it from afar, but you must go through it line by line, making sure that you do not leave any stone unturned. It's very important for poetry analysis. All right, let's consider one method, one interesting method on poetry analysis. It is called the SMILE method. I hope you won't forget that one. SMILE method. S stands for structure or form. So when you are looking at the structure or the form of the poem, you are asking yourself how many stanzas, how many lines. That will be your S. M stands for meaning or sense. Meaning or sense. What is the general sense of the poem? What is it that the poet is communicating? That's what you look out for. Obviously, you have to read through the poem in order for you to make out the sense or the meaning of the poem. Then we have I, which stands for imagery or figures of speech. What images has the poet used? Is it your simile? Is it your metaphor? Is it your personification? You must be able to see or identify those figures of speech and also explain their effectiveness. Our next letter is L. L stands for language. Language has to do with diction, sound devices, you name it. That will be your language. Then emotions, that will be your E. E stands for emotion. Emotion which has to do with the mood and tone. So as you go through the SMILE method, you will not leave any stone unturned. You will manage to go through the poem carefully so. And by so doing, you understand it better. Right, we will look at a poem and how to analyze it using the SMILE method. Right, I have for you there a poem entitled Boy on the Swing. Boy on a Swing, yes. And it is written by our poet, Mbuyiseni Oswald Mjali. Boy on a Swing. Right, I will just read through the poem quickly. Then we now use the SMILE method to analyze this poem. Boy on a swing. Slowly he moves to and fro, to and fro. Then faster and faster, he swishes up and down. His blue shirt billows in the breeze like a tattered kite. The world whirls by. East becomes west, north turns south. The four cardinal points meet in his head. Mother, where did I come from? When will I wear long trousers? And why was my father jailed? That is the poem, Boy on a Swing. Right now, let's analyze this poem together. The structure of the poem. Look at the poem. It has 3 stanzas. And it is of free verse because there is no particular rhyme scheme. Then we move to number 2, meaning. Meaning. What is the general sense of the poem? What is happening in the poem? We can see a boy is swinging fast until the world appears to be whirling by. The boy also asks his mother where he came from and why his father was jailed. And I think he has many questions and appears to be in distress. That is generally what the poem is about. And then we move on to imagery. When we look at line 4, we see onomatopoeia. Line 4, he swishes up and down. As he moves up and down, there is a swishing sound. So that is the onomatopoeia. The sound that is made is closely related to the word swishes. Line number 7, there is a simile there, like a tattered kite. His shirt, which is torn, is compared to a tattered kite. So you can imagine how torn the shirt is. Maybe it doesn't have any other to wear. Then stanza 2, line 8, a metaphor there. The world whirls by. There is a metaphor, the world is whirling by. In other words, the world seems to be moving to him and bringing about confusion in his own head. Number 4, language. Language. In lines 2 to 3, we see repetition. To and fro, then faster and faster. That is to highlight maybe the movement there. It happens over and over again. Maybe some kind of a soothing movement, but still is moving faster. Then line 8, There is alliteration, word, wells, the repetition of the consonant sound W. C, stanzas, line 1 to 14. Lines 14, to 16, there are rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions where the boy is asking, where did I come from? When will I wear long trousers? Why was my father jailed? And like we said before, maybe the boy is in distress. Yes, so many questions, yet no answers. You can even go further into looking at the poem closely. The punctuation also you can look at, such as the exclamation, to highlight how much agitated the boy is. So it's important that we look at the poem closely, carefully. And this is our smile method. Then we come to the last part of this method, the E. Okay. Yes, let's look at our E. E for emotions. In stanza 1, we see anxiety, frustration, or even distress as the mother is trying to soothe the child by using a swing. In us, maybe is evoked sympathy when we look at the boy's tattered shirt. And last stanza, there is frustration on the part of the boy. He has many questions. He appears to be in a bad space. No father, no clothes, maybe, and that is frustrating to the boy. Let's look at a short activity there. Number 1, what physical action does the mother use to comfort her distressed son? You may quickly think about that, or you can write it down quickly. Number 2, his blue shirt billows in the breeze like a tattered flag. Lines 5 to 7. Identify the figure of speech in these lines and explain. And explain it. Number 3, identify and explain the figure of speech in stanza 2. And number 4, what is the effect of the rhetorical questions in the last stanza? What is the effect of the rhetorical questions in the last stanza? You can quickly go through your answers, or you can quickly think about them as we get to our solution. Number 1, our answer will be she swings him. She swings him. Number 2 is a simile. His shirt is compared to a tattered flag. Number 3, metaphor. The boy is confused. He cannot tell different directions. Number 4, to show the plight of the boy. There are so many questions. So many questions, yet no answers. Right, let's come to our conclusion. Poetry analysis assists us in understanding the poem deeply. We understand both the internal and the external structure of the poem. A poem can evoke feelings from the reader through the language that is used. That is our lesson on poetry. Keep practicing using the smile method or any other method you find comfortable to you. Till we meet next time, that's the end of our lesson, and good day.